Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was on duty to launch the radio sonde the morning the bones showed up in the drift by Gravneset. The balloon skin tried to jump out of my hands with every gust. A wobbling pearl against a sky the colour of turned steel. Kings Bay lay quiet behind me. Ny-Ålesund's coloured wooden houses, the tall mast from the old airship days, and the low, white slab of the power plant with its stack breathing a thin, steady plume. Hours said, normal RPMs, clean fuel mix, wind out of the northwest at maybe 8 meters per second, moderate wind chill, cold, but ordinary. I clipped the radio sonde and watched it lift, its beeps ticking in my headset. RS at 200 meters, I said into the handheld, more to keep myself company than anything. We were 12 on station that month, small, even for winter. Tourist restrictions had thinned the boat traffic, and the Sysselmesteren had cut flights to essentials only. 12 people in the most northern year-round settlement on Earth, and the bay around us holding its breath under a skin of ice rubble and black water. The glacier faces across Kongsfjorden were a white wall, the mountains behind them toothy and patient. I watched the trace start to curve on the laptop, reviewed the upper air windfield like I had 1,000 times, then stowed the balloon kit, slung my skis, and started back toward the weather hut. The first strange thing that day wasn't the bones. It was the foxes, 3 of them, standing together on a ridge of wind-packed snow out toward Blomstrand-Halvøya, white on white with the kind of stillness that means intent. When an Arctic fox holds that still, it is waiting to see if the thing beneath the snow breathes again. They watch long. They listen longer. They were looking toward Gravneset, the old whaler cemetery everyone photographs each summer, when the beach clears of ice and the moss looks like velvet. In winter, the headboards sleep under wind slabs. Nothing to look at, nothing to dig for. And yet those foxes stood like carved scrimshaw, ears forward, not for a vole but for something bigger. I was still looking at them when the handheld crackled. "Karin, you at the mast?" "Between mast and hut," I said, returning. "Hold there." It was Anna, our liaison from the governor's office. Thick-bearded, pale eyes, born to this latitudinal shrug. Got a 121.5 ping north of Ny-London. Not a Cospus hit. Sounds like a personal locator. Could be someone's prank. Could be an old beacon waking up in the cold. I'd like to check. You free for a quick run? The emergency frequency needs no justification. Ski-Doo or Snowcat? "Take the piston bully," he said. "Wind stacking drifts in the tidal flats. You, me, Hannah, half an hour. Half an hour in Svalbard time can be a day, but the piston bully is honest in snow." We checked fuel, clipped helmets, and rolled out. The red box thumped along the old road across the moraine, heater grumbling, LED lights catching blowing crystals like swarms of gnats. Hannah sat on the bench behind us, watching the bay with the eyes glaciologists get, the eyes that measure, even when they're tired. The beacon chirped faint on Anna's receiver with each turn of the antenna, a pulse like a heartbeat, ahead and to the left. "Gravneset," Anna said. "We'll swing the point." Gravneset's shore was a jag of rock and tide cracks, the old whaler grave markers a memory under drifts. We stopped a little back from the beach to avoid rotten ice and went the last few 100 meters on foot, rifles slung. Outside Longyearbyen and Ny-Ålesund, you carry a rifle as naturally as you wear a hat. Ours were bolt-action .308s with simple optics, clean and oiled for cold, loaded with soft point for bears, for things that move too close in bad weather. I had never lifted mine for anything else. The beacon was real, all right, and new. An orange personal unit half buried in a scraped patch of snow. Its lanyard had frayed and snapped. Its body was scuffed as if it had been dragged by something with teeth. I turned it in my glove. It had registered to a tourist outfitter in Longyearbyen I recognized, a careful company that didn't mess with rules. Their groups weren't supposed to come this far in winter. The little screen showed an SOS was triggered at 6:12. It was now 10:23. Footprints, Hannah said quietly. They were shallow where the wind had combed them, deeper in the lee. Human boot treads at first. Modern lugs, Swedish brands she could name by sight. Then a scuffle. Then parallel lines like something had been dragged, then disturbed again by fresh gusts. Bear? Anna said. Bear would be fur, she said. And messy. This looks like... She stopped. Something pale stuck out of the drift a little further along the beach. Not fur, a curve of bone. I knelt and brushed at it with a mitten, then with a simple brush from my tools. Not a femur. The curvature was longer, more delicate. A rib. Old. Weather-polished, not the kind of thing to turn my stomach after a few summers cataloguing the whaler graves for visiting scientists. But it lay at an angle that said the whole grave had shifted. The foxes had been watching for this. Snow is a carpenter. It takes and gives. It moves what you think cannot move. Hannah stood a little back, reading the drift like a topo map. Last week's thaw front reached this slope, she said. East wind, slab released a metre down. It undercut the beach. These graves sit on a bench of permafrost. If the bench slumps, then bones come out. I finished. We all knew it could happen. The cemetery is roped off and respected. It happens some summers anyway. Old mariners make poor anchors when the ground itself is shifting. We found the first person 15 minutes later. He was crouched behind an ice-dropped boulder with his back to us, his jacket unzipped, bare scalp raw from cold. Both hands were tucked under his armpits in a posture I'd learned in classes as a picture of hypothermia. He rocked slightly, not from shivering. Shivering would have been a good sign, but in a slow, mechanical way that looked like a metronome. I came around in his field of view, voice pitched low. Hey, I said. It's okay. We're from the station. We have heat. People in the cold will sometimes grab at you like a drowning person. You brace for it. You get your arms ready. You say all the words they taught you. I'm going to put my hand on your shoulder. Can you look at me? Can you tell me your name? He lifted his head. His gaze latched on my face and slipped a little past it, like the wind could move his eyes the way it moved snow. His lips were cracked and pale, his teeth chattering, not with the high tremor of cold, but with a rhythmic tap against themselves as if driven by a piston. In his lap, fingers twitched against the fabric of his jacket. Then he smiled. It was not a normal smile. It was the smile you see when a stroke takes the face and leaves only one set of muscles responding. It came and went too slowly, as if the instruction to move this way had to root around something broken. What's your name? I said again. His mouth opened as if the word was there. Then his head turned toward Hannah's shoulder, past me, and his pupils changed shape in a way I have never seen in daylight. Only later did I learn that can be a refraction illusion when the corneal surface is supercooled. At the time, it looked like the eye itself flexed. I put my hand on his shoulder. His skin was like a chilled fish, slick with the condensation of warm air meeting something so cold it cannot register as the body of a person. He moved then. A quick surge, strong, uncoordinated, and his fingers found the exposed skin under my glove where the cuff had ridden up. They pinched. It was not a grab for warmth. It was more like a pawing at a signal. Anna's hand came down on the man's wrist, firm. Easy, Anna said, to me. We need to get him inside. We got him up and into the piston bully. He did not fight, but he did not help. His muscles worked against him, strange surges and pauses. When Hannah asked how many people were with him, his head turned toward her voice, but his mouth didn't find words. Only that slow smile, the kind that makes you want to cry if you let it sit in your mind too long. I took the beacon and toggled it to acknowledged, switched from VHF to the sat phone so I could reach Longyearbyen without the hills between. The call sign of the Joint Rescue Coordination Center in Bodo came in clear through the satellites, and I kept my report concise, the way they like. Beacon, Gravneset, 1 adult male, hypothermia, possible others missing, low wind with gusting. The operator said the governor's helicopter was on a medical flight already and might divert. Might. Weather was a watch, not yet a go. We brought him into quarantine as if he had COVID, because the last few years have taught us all habits we keep. The sick room in the clinic had an anteroom and a HEPA unit. Dr. Malik had kept the cart stocked like a ritual. Malik was gentle to a fault, and it shows in the way he moves around frightened people. He kept his distance while we stripped the man off wet clothes and wrapped him in vapor barrier and blankets. Corey, our American electrician, slid the bear hugger hose under the blanket to circulate warm air, calibrated so we didn't drop him into after-drop shock. The man's skin rose in temperature. His muscle tone changed. For one good minute, he looked like any severe cold case on the way to better. Then he stopped breathing. It happened in a blink. Chest motion gone, pulse thin as a rumour. Malik's hands did exactly what hands trained for cold do. He reached for airway first, did a jaw thrust gently, kept the neck neutral, checked for obstruction. Our man's mouth opened as if yawning, and a sound came not from lungs, but from his throat. A dry scrape like you make with cardboard. The bear hugger hummed. The pulse oximeter refused to read. Cold fingers and cheap sensors do not love each other. The EKG we put on showed a rhythm that wasn't flatline, wasn't normal. Something brady and wandering, a heart trying to listen to an absent conductor. Malik met my eyes for one beat and said, "Get the bag valve mask." We ventilated. There is no heroism to describe in that. It is a work you do like stacking wood. One press, one release. Watch the chest fall, count. After 2 minutes, the EKG changed. After 3, the man's chest rose by itself, shallow, as if to satisfy a parent in the room. The monitor flickered a heart rate I would not leave at home, but would accept in a winter hut. Malik told us to keep the bear hugger on warm, but not hot, to avoid rapid peripheral dilation. "He's cold-brained," he said softly. "Give him time." His eyes were open. He did not look at any of us. When I stepped out of the anteroom, the hallway smelled like canned soup. In our kitchen, Zofia was stirring a big pot with a wooden paddle. And for 1 second, I wanted to pretend we were all simply busy in Polaris's winter routine. Weather, soup, maintenance, snow. I washed my hands until the smell of latex went away and stared out at the bay. The foxes had come closer, their tracks stitching arcs in the fresh crust. Light skated in sheets across the ice, a glare that made you squint. Above the mountains, a thin, fine cirrus unrolled like parchment being laid for a record of a day. Anna came to stand beside me. "JRCC pushed us to the afternoon schedule," he said. "The governor's crew will launch as soon as winds drop over the pass. We're told to hold tight." "We found only him," I said. "For now," he said. "I'll put a team on sleds after lunch, rope up, sweep in pairs." I knew the rules. I knew that people lost in the cold are lost for a reason, and that reason is not always terrain. But I also knew there were headboards under that snow, and that the snow had moved. There was a taste in the air that I've only felt when something dead lies near a thin layer of new ice, and the water decides to let a little of its story seep up. It is not rot, not like in the south. It is more like a missing word that sits at the back of your tongue, sour and metallic. By early afternoon, clouds had slid down from the higher ridges, the light turning pearly and flat. Hannah and I went to the lab to pull the morning's data. That's where we heard the first knock. It came from the service tunnel on the lower level. In Ny-Ålesund, many buildings are connected by covered walkways or buried culverts, so you can cross in weather without dying for it. This knock came through the steel like a spoon on a pipe. 3 taps, then a pause, then 3 again. Hannah froze with her hand on the server rack. I tilted my head to catch the pattern. Our emergency code was 5 short knocks, then a long, then 5. Something you could manage even if you were wearing mittens made for outer space. But people default to SOS when their brain is tired. 3, 3, 3. I was moving before I registered I was moving. The tunnel hatch has a wheel you spin to break a thin frost that grows in its threads. I turned it, opened a hand's breadth, and shouted, "Who is it?" The wind answered from the culvert's throat with a hiss, and then a face moved out of shadow, pressed to the crack, white as the inner side of your wrist. I know that face. The person it belonged to came in 3 years ago for a summer study of orc eggs and simply never left, because there is a kind of personality that fits a high-latitude settlement the way certain bird bones fit a wing. He's slim, always laughing, speaks English with a Polish pace. I saw his eyes and the way the lids blinked with something like grit where there could be no grit, and for one heartbeat I forgot the man in quarantine and all the wise protocols, and opened the wheel the rest of the way. He moved through the gap without full body coordination, like his muscles remembered how to cross a sill but forgot how to shift weight. The door swung wider than I wanted. Behind him, 2 more forms came forward along the culvert, heads tipped toward our light. Sophia's voice came from the kitchen, something about ladles and bowls. And in the clinic, the bear hugger hummed. I reached for the wheel and hauled, dragging the door through the last centimetre of frost with a shriek. The rubber gasket pressed back against steel. The latch set. The second face reached the glass window of the hatch and smudged it with breath. When breath smudged it, my heart changed speed. "Karin," Hannah said very softly, "what are we doing?" I keyed the intercom and spoke to the whole station. "Lock interior doors," I said. "Treat all exterior entries as compromised until we regroup. Anna, meet me in the main hall with what you've got." "What I've got," Anna said when he arrived, "is a flare pistol, 2 radios, and the sense to wait until we think." He took one look through the hatch window and flinched, not outwardly, but in the kind of way a body does when it adds a notch to a mental tally that reads number of people, number of unknowns. "Governor's office says the helo is 15 minutes out," he said. "We hold. We do not open exterior doors except to a marked crew." After that, a simple rulebook tried to do a complex job. We split the station into 3 zones: inner, mid, outer. Inner kept positive pressure with the HEPA units, and its doors got taped so we could tell if someone had gone through. Mid was for moving between buildings with suits and respirators. Outer was for anything we didn't understand yet. We posted Corey and Oscar in Tyvek and masks by the generator room to protect our heat. We put Hannah and Zofia on radios to log traffic. Malik stayed with our hypothermia man, who breathed like he was in rehearsal for something he had not agreed to perform. The knocks did not stop. They came from the tunnel first, then from the back door of the lab, then from the loading bay at the power plant where pallets of dry stores waited under snow. The rhythm stayed simple. 3, 3, 3. Sometimes it was bare hands on steel, sometimes something harder. Once it came in a long, slow scrape that only ended because it ran out of surface. I tried not to imagine knuckles. I tried to think like a systems engineer. What is the pressure? Where are the records? What do we know? We knew this. A beacon had called us to a beach where graves were exposed. A man in hypothermia had come out of the wind with his mind not available. He had stopped breathing and then returned to it without the usual arc of panic or recovery. He had muscle activation patterns that didn't match any of the conditions Malik had seen. People we knew were outside, or things that looked like people we knew. And the sound they made against our doors was not a plea, it was a pattern. When the helicopter came, the sound of it made my throat close. It is a unique comfort, that pulsed thunder, the sound of a machine and a crew with a plan. I went to the south door with Anna and watched the Super Puma flare in and hold, the rotor wash peeling snowskin off the ground like the rind of an ice fruit. 2 crew in bright suits sprinted the 10 meters from the door to the hatch, heads low, one carrying a bag, the other a rope spool. We cycled them in through the airlock and sealed it. The taller one pushed up his visor and grinned, then saw our faces and stopped. "We heard," he said. It was the strangest medevac I have ever witnessed. They did not touch our doors. They did not open any hatch that opened to the culverts. They went through the mid-zone to the clinic, took one look at the man in the bed, and asked Malik a barrage of questions in a musical North Norwegian. Malik's answers came out measured, steady. Then they looked at me. What about the others? The shorter one said. What others? I said, and then I understood what my own mouth had implied. Others, as in those outside, or others, as in the missing from the beacon. We don't know how many, I said. We don't know their status. We know there are people at our doors who seem disoriented. Do they try handles? He said. They knock, I said. The taller one tilted his head. Knock how? I did not think there was a wrong way to say 3, 3, 3. I banged it on the metal frame of a chair, and the man in the bed raised his head with a motion like a drawing sped up. Slow fast, slow, unnatural at both ends. His eyes found my hand. He was on his side of the bed. Malik had buckled him in with a restraint to keep him from falling. He did not strain against it. He just watched my fingers, the way a seal watches the surface for the hole where it needs to breathe. Then his lips moved. If you had asked me that morning if there was a sound that would make me put down a tool and look for the nearest bolt on door frame, I would have wanted to impress you with blunt facts. Ice will break, and orange mechanical pistons will break, and a rifle will break you if you forget respect. But the sound he made then was not a thing, it was a gap. It was a word, almost. Something like home, said without air in the syllable. His mouth did not shape the consonant, it shaped the space around it. We heard the first footsteps on the roof at dusk. Roofs hold heat, and we had a stack with a steady plume. We cut it, not to kill the power, but to change the flow. We switched to the secondary generator, cut the waste heat to the roof vent, diverted it through a buried run that melted snow a meter away from the building instead. The fans made a different tone when the diverter opened. The footsteps moved. At 19 o'clock, Hannah picked up motion on the security cameras by the storage yard. The wind had died, and the snow had gone to fine powder that clinks like glass beads. People moved across it with slow deliberation, like a line of sleepwalkers. Their faces were covered in frost in a way that didn't match exertion. Hoarfrost not only on eyebrows, but like a mask. Some wore bare hands. One had no hat but didn't check ears. They were not moaning, not drooling, not any of the pulp images that cheapen fear. They were quiet, listening. They hear the generator, Corey said. They hear patterns, Hannah said. They turn their heads when the diverter changed tone. I need to know if they're breathing cold air or warm it, Malik said. He had a thermal imager from the lab and pointed it toward the window. The live image showed white where he'd expect white. Stacks are eaves. The moving shapes were grey. Core temp low, he said. Peripheral temps marginal, but they are not dead. What do you think this is? Anna said, not frightened. Just asking for a label to put on the clipboard where the world keeps reasonable things. Malik's mouth compressed. I think something ancient woke up in a body that cannot properly host it, he said. I think we need to stop calling them anything for a few hours and watch. So we watched. They did not try handles. They knocked. When we banged once from inside, they turned their heads toward the sound with a synchronized motion I have never seen in a crowd outside of a parade ground. When we banged twice, they did not answer. When we banged 3 times, they approached doors. The pattern did something between the parts of their brains that listen and the parts that signal muscles. They were not animals. An Arctic fox uses silence differently. They were not us. That was the hardest part to admit. At 21:15, the Super Puma lifted in a belly full of fuel, circled once, and headed back toward Longyearbyen, with our hypothermia man and one crew member whose job was to watch a monitor and press a button if a number changed. The wind at the pass had opened a pocket for them. I watched them go with an ache in my hands I only recognized later as the feeling you get when an ambulance taillight disappears and you think that was the sound of something that might not return. We settled into shifts. Sophia fed us soup, ladle after ladle, portioning out steadiness. We taped up arrows in the corridor floors, the way we'd practiced during the pandemic. One-way flow to the latrine, left-hand rule through the mid-zone, masks in the hall, voices low. Hannah printed fresh hazard stickers and put them on doors with a meticulousness that was her way of holding the day in one piece. Corey bundled wires in the generator room with the calm that belongs to electricians who know which arc can take you and which is a friend. I wrote times in the log in neat numbers because that makes that which doesn't fit feel held. Outside, the figures moved through gears of motion that kept time with those knocks. What made us change the plan was a smell. You cannot talk about smell without people thinking of something graphic. That's not what I mean. The smell was like old coins in a damp pocket. The HEPA units caught nearly everything, but not this. It came when the wind shifted east and slid under a gap at the loading bay, and it brought with it not decay, but a hint of a chemistry set. Aldehydes, someone said later, and a solvent you find in old museum storage cases. Not the breath of a body, not the scent of fuel, but the faint, unplaceable tale of a process. Permafrost, Hannah said, and this time the word did not mean a field day measuring thaw depth. It meant 1,000,000 years of things that never took a deep breath, moving in air that touched skin. We slept in turns, 2 hours at a time. I woke at 3:10 from a dream that was not a dream. The knock had come to find me. 3, 3, 3. I dressed. I put on a mask out of habit and gloves, and I walked the corridor like you walk down after a fire alarm, when you know there is no fire, but you smell one anyway. At the rear door, the sound was up close. I leaned a little to the glass and saw a face in the lantern light we had hung above the entry. It was smooth with frost. The lips moved. If you have ever seen the way a newborn tries to make the shape of a vowel it has heard all its time inside, that is what it looked like. "Go rest," Zofia said in the kitchen doorway. "I'll take this watch." "I'm good," I said, and found that my voice was cracked the way a voice gets when you have said your own name too many times that day. At 6 o'clock, the valley filled with wind again, a soft white roar from the northwest. Snow slid like sand. The figures outside moved with the wind in a way that wasn't fight and wasn't submission. They leaned into it to reduce cross-section, as if some pre-conscious geometry was still online. And when the temperature dropped 4 degrees and wind chill took it down another 6, they slowed. It was measurable. A camera on the roof took images every 15 seconds, and Corey set up a script that computed the movement by comparing frame to frame. At -28, they moved 30% slower. At -32, 50%. At -35, they stopped. Not stopped, Hannah said, watching the time-lapse later, when we could breathe a little. Stilled. She traced a finger on the screen. "Look at the way ice forms in their eyelashes." "You call that still," Corey said. "I call that the universe doing us a temporary favor." It was a favor, and we took it. We planned. We divided the station into 2 clusters. Cluster A would go cold and dark and draw the mass to it, the old workshop building, the storage yard, the lab extension. Cluster B would go quiet, not cold, and house the 12 of us for a day and a half with full HEPA and minimal heat loss. We would open the outermost doors of Cluster A, hang a handful of thermal blankets inside like bait, set a speaker loop to play white noise at a frequency that matched the generator hum. If the figures followed heat and pattern, they would collect inside Cluster A. Then when the wind came back and temperatures dropped again, they would still. It was a cruel plan, but none of the parts in it had names anymore, even if our eyes kept trying to assign one when a particular form tilted its head the way someone we loved did. Anna went first with the flare pistol and a rifle slung. Hannah with a handheld that had eaten 4 batteries already that night. Corey to lay cables. I stayed by the main control panel to switch circuits with a map of the station spread under my arms. We used hand signals wherever we could to avoid creating patterns. When someone did need to speak, they used a code we invented on the fly. Single syllables, no repetition. It was a child's game that carried the weight of the day, and somehow it worked. At 8:20, Cluster A's doors stood open. The figures outside drifted toward them, the ones that could still move. You could see their ears redden where the wind touched them, and I thought, unreasonably, that if they were ours, then maybe we should put hats back on. The speaker made a low, aimless rumble, a lullaby for something that cannot sleep. One by one, They went inside. Then the wind rose more. Then the temperature dropped further. By 9:40, Cluster A was quiet. We waited an hour, maybe, though time had stopped doing normal stretches. Then we shut Cluster A's doors again, firm, tight, bolts biting. We taped the seams. We pressed our foreheads to the warm metal on our side and listened. Nothing but the sound of fans in B and the old building settling. Now we call, Hannah said, not to me, not to any of us, to the people who hold the radio in Longyearbyen and ask if we are complete. JRCC's voice arrived with the hush that only satellite knows. The sea ice edge had moved, bringing in drift that had closed the marine approach for the governor's boat. The helicopter crews were juggling flight windows like a chainsaw act. You can go at 11, they said, or you can go at 13. 11 is gusts, 13 is heavier snow but steadier air. Choose. We chose 11 because the only thing worse than the wrong decision is no decision, and because we could still see the corner of the helipad through the blown crystals then, and at 13 we might not. We packed one bag each, freezer-dry food, documents, external drives with the last month of data, Malik's medkit, Zofia's bread still warm. We suited, we taped, we looked at Cluster A once more on the monitors and saw only stillness. We walked to the south door and found the wind pushing against it with both open hands. The Super Puma came out of the grey like a promise trying to become a fact. It hovered, put skids down, jumped a little to the side, then settled. The crew made the run between rotor and door with the formal haste that looks casual only because they've done it 1,000 times. They took 4 of us on the first lift. The injured, the tired, the quietest. The rest of us waited behind the stack with snow scoring our cheeks like sand. I felt nothing. Then I felt my heartbeat again, counting down something I didn't name. The second lift took 4 more. I watched Sophia climb with her bread bag under her arm like a child, turn to look back at the kitchen window, smile that small smile people make to themselves when they put the kettle on and don't overfill it. The pilot's hand lifted, the machine rose, it turned. It vanished into what I would in a book called Cloud. But up here down low that day, it was a kind of floor-to-ceiling whiteness that happens when every particle is falling and no single one of them cares about your plans. The third lift never landed. A subtle change in the helicopter's sound told us it was holding, flaring, wrestling with something you could not see. The pilot's voice on the radio was calm in that way trained voices are, acknowledging a downdraft and a decision to climb for a different approach. Hold positions, he said. We'll come in from the west. We did not hear the knock so much as feel it. It came through our boots from Cluster A. I have written and erased what happened next many times because the truth is simple, and the brain hates simple truths that do not fit the boxes it uses for being human. The wind shifted 10 degrees. The heat flux changed at the gasket of one of the old doors. It was enough. Things inside that had become still began to become less still. The knock that came up through the floor was 3, 3, 3. We did not run. Running makes patterns. We moved. We moved as if each step had to be thought through a second time. The helipad was inbound. The pilot's voice cut through wind. 30 seconds. Arne counted us with his hand. The same hand that had pressed that beacon to his ear that morning. The same hand that knocked on the bed frame to demonstrate a rhythm that now lived between the boards of our station. 1, 2, 3, 4. I found myself behind Hannah, ahead of Corey, Malik beside me with his bag strapped and his eyes looking as if sleep had run out and replaced itself with salt. We stepped out into rotor wash, a small world of moving white, and climbed. We didn't see the last thing until we were airborne. The camera on the Super Puma's belly transmitted to the screen by the crew seat, a grainy image of 2 rectangles of buildings and the dark sea beyond. Cluster A's doors were closed and taped. A row of shapes stood along them now, nearer than before. Cluster B's stack vented a thin plume, the kind of proud little flag that says we have kept the machines you asked us to keep. The wind carved coruscating lines across the snow, fast enough to erase human footprints as we watched, slow enough to leave the wider shapes to be argued with by historians and pathologists and whomever else has the steadiness to anchor words to something that moved like that in the cold. In Ny-Ålesund they took us, not to the main terminal, such as it is, but to the hangar where the governor's ship equipment is stored, because the hospital had to be prepared, and because ventilation matters, and because sometimes the best corridor is the one you can roll a door closed on. They were kind. Kindness is the one thing that holds its chemical composition in the cold. We answered all their questions. We wrote our reports. We drank a warm drink I can still taste if I put my tongue to my back molars and remember. Someone from the institute took our drives and said words about data integrity that meant, in a different year, please do not lose people here. They found 3 more on the shoreline by Gravneset later that week, upright, motionless, clustered around a spot where the snow had sunk and left a cone of ice that reflected light oddly. They brought them to an outbuilding, cold enough to keep them in, masks on their faces so their exhalations did not change the humidity. They did not give them names then. That came later, in papers, in briefings, in the quiet way communities have of laying language down where fear has scoured it. Back in Ny-Ålesund, when the wind finally cooperated, the governor's crew returned and took Cluster A apart, like bomb techs taking apart a memory that has its own triggers. They counted, they measured, they sealed and resealed. They walked with ropes tied between them as if crossing a glacier with crevasses invisible beneath a skin of drift. They kept careful notes, and those notes had plain verbs and even plainer adjectives, because that too is a kind of kindness, telling a thing what it is without adding what you fear it might be. Months later, when the sun came back for more than an hour at a time, I stood again at the balloon launching site with a radio sonde in my hand. The air had that hollow ring the first days of spring have in polar latitudes. The snow is still there, but the light has changed its contract with the ground. The plumes from the power plant made straight pillars. The mountains were patient as always, which may be their only true superpower. I let the balloon go. It rose with greedy speed, eager to read the morning. The handheld ticked. RS at 200 meters, I said, because I liked the sound of ritual. The foxes were there too, one of them with a hint of its brown summer coat coming in at the ears. They were looking toward Gravneset again, but without the alertness of that day. When people ask me now where the story begins, I do not say the grave, I say the knock. The snow hid more than bones. Yes, it hid a pattern. I do not know if it was a virus from the old earth, or a fungus that tolerates salt, or something we do not have a drawer for yet in the cabinets of science. I know that in cold, things are quieter, but not dead. I know a brain can hold 2 truths if you give it time. A person can be the person you knew, and also a set of motions that respond to sound and heat more than to their name spoken in your voice. I know we made a plan that was not perfect, but was not wrong. I know soup matters. I know people whose job is to fly into weather will choose again to fly into it. Ny-Ålesund feels like a metropolis after the silence of Kings Bay, with its grocery store and its snowmobiles queued at the supermarket like carriages. We sat there a month, the 12 of us, plus those they were able to salvage from our doors, and we learned not to tap our fingers unconsciously on tables. We learned to answer the high, bright knock of a spoon on a cup with a smile and a captured hand. We learned to avoid patterns that might pull a mind we loved into a loop. Malik learned to sleep again. Hannah learned that her printer doesn't feed labels in fog. Corey learned that he can rebuild a generator control panel with only one of his best 2 screwdrivers. I went back to Ny-Ålesund in June because the station needed hands and because my hands had been there before. When I stepped onto the wooden walkway and smelled dry pine planks warming after a morning frost, I felt the body memory you feel when you come home. You know where your feet go, where your hand will find the handle, where steam will fog your glasses. I looked at Cluster B and loved it the way you love an old boat that does not leak. I looked at Cluster A and felt something harder to name, a complicated knot of gratitude and caution and the memory of a knock. We had replaced the doors. We had sealed new gaskets from Germany, rated down to a temperature that makes your breath scare itself. We had put a fresh layer of insulation along the service tunnel and 2 new cameras and a different kind of latch. The things we do are the things we can do. At Gravneset, the summer team worked carefully with archaeologists to lay the old bones back in their beds, not as trophies, but as elders, given a new blanket. The foxes watched. Arctic terns nested on the gravel, like they owned the place, which they do in their season. The sun circled without ever setting, and my body clock gave up and learned to trust the kettle. That night, or whatever you call a stretch of hours, when the sun stops pretending you are important, I lay in my bunk and held the silence like a friend. The station made the noises stations make: fans, wind, a pipe expanding as water warmed it, the distant hum of the rack where the servers that hold our weather traces keep their small lights steady. In that hum, there is comfort. In that hum, there is risk. I tapped my fingers on the blanket by accident. 3, 3, 3, and then stopped, smiling despite myself, at the way the body repeats the day until you ask it to tell a different story. In the morning, I launched another balloon. It went up with that hungry speed again, chasing the layer where the air changes its mind about itself. The handheld ticked, the laptop drew lines, the mountain shadows shrank, and the fox on the ridge sat on its tail like a prince. I held the reel, then let it go, feeling the tug pull instead at something deep in my chest. I imagined the balloon rising into a layer where the wind from the west met wind from the north, and those 2 old arguments shook hands. Data is a story. We put it down because one day someone will need to know where the line started to bend. There were rules, new ones and old ones, printed and taped and folded into our pockets. Don't go alone. Don't open a door because someone says your name. Don't make patterns where patterns can harm. If you need to knock, knock twice and then once, but never 3 times in a row. If a thing looks frozen, it is waiting. If a thing looks awake, it might be listening to something that isn't you. We are used to thinking of the poles as a place where the world ends. I do not think that anymore. I think when our station hums, and the animals go about their work, and the old graves rest, and the wind goes where it wants, that we live on a line where the world learns to begin again each hour and calls that miracle by its plainest name, day. If there is a secret under the snow, it is not only bones and not only patterns. It is the fact that everything we did that held, soup, steady words, unheroic doors, was a choice we could remake tomorrow, and we made it. The last time I stood at the beach by Gravneset, before the autumn came, the sun sat low and warm, and the water threw back little coins of light at the skewer, cruising a metre above it. The headboards showed their black crosses on white posts, simple, stark, stubborn. I thought of the hands that put those bodies there, and of the hands that moved them, and of my own that taped a seam and closed a latch and held a handle against the pressure of wind and something other than wind. I thought of a knock and a pause and a knock, and of the space between patterns where we make room for the people we want to stay. When I tell this story aloud, for the voice recorder that my institute insists belongs to the archive of weather and work, I keep my tone even. I say coordinates, temperatures and speeds. I say names, Hannah and Corey, and Zofia and Malik, Anna, the governor's crew, the foxes, the terns. I say numbers and times. I say the word pattern a lot. Sometimes the recorder hums a little, and I imagine some future listener wondering if that hum means something it does not mean. It is only the motor spinning the tape at a constant rate. You cannot read a secret into every steady sound. Some of them are what keep us alive. But I end with a thing that doesn't fit in any logbook, so I end it here too. When the wind is low and the bay is flat and the mountains hold their patience like a taught lesson, you can hear a sound from the glacier across Kongsfjorden. It is not a crack, not a roar. It is a sigh, an exhale long and soft. a release of air that has been trapped longer than any person can imagine. It is the sound the world makes when it lets go of a story it has been holding. We listen to that sound with respect. We do not answer it with a knock. We answer by standing still, the way the fox does on the ridge, and watching, and keeping our hands warm for the next door we will need to close or open or hold together against what we did not choose. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.